So now this is the sustainable wildlife management topic, and it will be presented by Marie-Christine Commissaren, and I will make a short complement of Starlink to this topic. And I will share my screen. So Marie-Christine, feel free to indicate me when I have to change.
Okay.
Slides. So.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me well? It's fine. Okay.
Okay for the screen?
It's okay for me.
Okay.
I hope it is the same for everybody. Okay.
Okay.
I guess my presentation will be a little out of step with the previous speakers, and I will be looking. Okay, we have the conversation on the screen. Robin, on my screen, I have the conversation and not the PowerPoint.
Ah. Okay.
Yes, that's okay. It's okay. Okay. Don't move. Yes, I will be looking at how we can broaden the scope of the guidance on the topic of wildlife management, which are currently very focused on the meat sector. And as Robin said at the end of my presentation, Robin will talk about the document and work for the SBSTTA-25. So the next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, thank you. As a preamble, I will question the topic and its formulation. Yes, with three questionable terms. First, sustainable. It should address the ethical and political principles and goals from Aichi target to SDGs. The notion of wildlife. If I understood well, in the wildlife in American English means wild fauna. But which species we have to take into account? Terrestrial versus marine fauna, domestic fauna too, and other living beings like such as flora, algae, fungi, and trees. And in terms of management, what does it mean? How? Which tools and means? What kind of mechanisms? Financial, market, legal, political, and what kind of governance? By and for whom? Which kind of stakeholders with their views, rules, customs, and system of values? That you know that I am a social scientist with a background in political ecology and anthropology, and researcher in IAD, the French National Institute of Research for Sustainable Development. My main field works are in the global south, and I am more expert in hunting than no, and I'm not an expert in hunting, but more in fishing with a gender lens. So my presentation will be, I guess, different, and I will try to highlight three main points for the history of the topic. I show it is an old topic with new challenges, the current context of discussions, understanding of like living in harmony with nature, and the current issues on the topic within the framework of the CBD. Next slide. Yes, thank you. It's an old topic. At the beginning, really focus on the bush meat and on the trade and consumption of bush meat, with the main target to protect wild fauna against humans, and considering hunters as poachers, and with also a shift to protect and with coercive means. To protect nature, the species. Once again, that these supposed virgin nature is supposed to be protected against the IPSC, indigenous people and local communities. And we see all along since 1992 the shift from emblematic species protection to habitat co-management. Next. And I would like to come back to the very polysemic notion of natural heritage. With, we cannot concept all the biodiversity, so we have to do a choice. And there are questionable criteria for selecting heritage species with different way to define them according to the scientists, among the scientists. between endangered, rare, endemic keystones. And very often in our emblematic bestiary, there are more pandas, seals, and turtles, and mosquitoes and cockroaches, and more terrestrial animals and insects. And there are official processes. We spoke about convention from Paris to Rio, the other conventions such as CITES, the Food and Agriculture Organization. All these conventions and bodies are machines for building and recognizing natural heritage. We have also to underline the weight of environmental bodies and lobbies such as IUCN, WWF, Conservation International. But besides these official processes, I would like to put forward the local processes for recognizing heritage. And from our studies and different studies, there are three major criteria. First, the natural object has to be inherited from the ancestors. They are supposed to be passed to the next generation and so to be sustainably managed. And third, to be the object of a collective. There is a strong mark of identity. And you can imagine that there is conflicts of values and interests. Next. And what about the tools and means? Once again, there is a changing approaches from emblematic species and from coercive and strict protection of emblematic species such as turtle to the need to conciliate the protection of species with the use of the local communities. So besides and beyond the red list of endangered species, there are also a new approach in terms of ecosystemic approach and habitat conservation, and more recently the famous 30-30 for the protected area, the COP15, and also the needs to take into consideration the ecological connectivity between the protected areas. I would like to insist it is not only a question of ecological connectivity or ecological solidarity, but also a question, an issue of social solidarity. And the new and more famous paradigm of sustainable management and use. And I will come back to the last report, to the report of the IPBES launched in 2022. Next, for whom do we conserve the wildlife? There is still a debatable debate on the legal status of the wildlife. Is it a common heritage, and at what scale, from local to global scale? Is it a public good or a private asset? And I would like to remind you the famous Article 8G in the preamble of the CBDs that recognize the sovereignty of each state, but also the need to take into account the knowledge, innovations, and tradition of the local people and of the indigenous people and local communities. And what we can see is there is very often environmental violence and environmental injustice because of the enclosure of species. And we have to take into account the three dimensions of justice in terms of distribution. That means the use and access rights to the species and the areas, but also in terms of procedure and in terms of process that are to be inclusive, and what extent the IPLC are really included in the decision-making process, but also contextual and the need to recognize the indigenous local knowledge. So next. Yes, thank you. The current context of discussions is under the ban of living in harmony with nature, and with three main targets: conservation and valorization, equitable share of benefits, recognized in the Nagoya Protocol, and linking wildlife conservation and IPLC livelihood. And but also the need to control the global and illegal trade. And the main aim is to respond not in silo, but at the same time to the SDGs and to address their nexus. I guess we will have an introduction on the link between biodiversity and climate change, and there are positive but also negative interaction between fighting against climate change and fighting against biodiversity loss, and we have to address these interactions. And next slide. Yes, thank you. In the SDGs, there is environmental and societal goals. As environmental goals are biodiversity erosion, climate change, land degradation, resource depletion, but also the issues of poverty, hunger, and equity. And we are in a context of systemic crisis, and we have to find new models of development and new approaches, such as One Earth. And I have put it here, the schema of the One Earth approach that need to link really animal health, environmental health, and human health. And the COVID crisis is a very good and unfortunate illustration of these links and this urgency to take into account this link. It is not obvious to take into account on between the different scientists, but we are in an interconnected world from local to global, with a very busy international agenda, with a COP, notably, with dedicated dialogue platforms such as IPCC and IPBES, and with more and more contested legal and financial regulatory mechanisms. Next. I will come back to the IPBES work and framework. Last year, in 2022, there are two IPBES assessments have been launched. One on the diverse values and valuation of nature, and the other on the sustainable use of wild species. And the last report of this year, invasive alien species, just have been launched, as introduced by Rosalie Pellens. What is interesting in the IPBES framework is the paradigm shift. Experts decided to abandon the notion of ecosystem services because nature doesn't render services, it doesn't have only instrumental values, and they adopt the notion of nature contribution to people, taking into account the system of values, the diverse worldviews and knowledge system, and notably taking into account the indigenous local knowledge. And at the last IPBES plenary session last week, I was really astonished by the constant references and additions to the text to human rights, to ILKs, and to Mother Earth-centered and nature-centered approach. It's really a major trend in the IPBES framework. Next. Yes, global and illegal trade are still a key and are recognized as a key driver on unsustainability. Here, I would like to illustrate this phenomenon with the illegal trade of shark finning. As you know, maybe along west coast of Africa, the small-scale fishermen specialize in this highly lucrative and short-term industry. They target ray and shark species, often using only their fins to supply the East Asian market. This practice is neither sustainable nor equitable, and it not only degrades biodiversity and destroys the trophic chain, these species being keystone species, but also disorganizes and weakens markets and thus the food systems of indigenous people and local communities. And I'll give you another phenomenon of unsustainable and unfair practices being highlighted and known as imported degradation, with the example of shrimps. Sardines are transformed into fish meal that fed shrimps, and shrimps are intensively farmed in Southeast Asia to the detriment of mangroves converted to aquaculture ponds. And there is a legal step forward at the scale of European Union. In the last December, European Union signed an agreement to limit imported deforestation, and this agreement covers cattle, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, soy, and timber. And we hope that it will be this agreement will include also assets from savanna and coastal wetlands like mangrove. Next. The three pillars have been were mentioned by previous speakers, and they are really very well put forward as principle and in the narrative, but we have to question their implementation on the ground. Next. Here, I would like to show you the main messages from the sustainable use of wild species, a report from IPBES. You see here the scope and organizing structure of the report, with a diversity of species groups taken into account, aquatic animals, plants, trees, and terrestrial animals, and associated biomes, ecoregion, and ecosystems, the different practices of extractive practices, fishing, gathering, lodging, and terrestrial animal harvesting, and the non-extractive practices, such as bird observing, and finally, the different uses and values associated with species, from customary values to aesthetic values and recreation. And among the main synthetic messages towards the decision maker, billions of people depend on the use of wild species, often without knowing it. At least 50,000 species are under use, and sustainable use of wild species is central to identity and culture of many indigenous people and local communities. Sustainable use of wild species is going to be seriously challenged by common threats, especially climate change, increasing demand due to increasing population, and technological advances. But next. Yes. In the report, the experts show that there are sustainable use of wild species is challenging but possible, and they identify 7 key set of policy actions. And now also the next step is to scale up the policies that work and address target 14. Next. According to, coming back to the policy success depends on a social ecological context, support to fairness, rights, and equity, addressing notably the target 21 and 22. That means to take into account the socio-ecological conceptualization of sustainable use that influence monitoring and policy and help avoid failure. Fairness, rights, and equity are essential to sustainable use, and outcomes of market-based incentives such as certification are mixed and mostly work in high-value markets. Next. Just to have key preliminary messages. The first message is that food systems are the main driver of biodiversity loss, and without transforming the food system, we will not be able to reverse biodiversity loss. Removing perverse subsidies that destroy biodiversity, increasing financing for biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and equity is an urgent need. Another point is a greater ambition for achieving biodiversity targets and for biodiversity justice, common but differentiated, with a notion of differentiated responsibility. We have to promote biodiversity justice and ensuring inclusive biodiversity governance and participation of key rights holders. We have to avoid false solutions and market-based biodiversity trading schemes, such as offset and credit schemes, including those that fall under nature-based solution. And we have also to have careful messagings about the pitfalls of 30 to 30 target for protected areas versus strengthening the global approach. We have to support to indigenous and community conserved territories globally and convivial conservation approach. And just to go quickly to a few conclusive remarks, I would like to once again to underline that there are still conflicting values, interests, and norms of action in different contexts, from global to global, and to put forward the limits of international agreements and the perverse effects of biodiversity commodification or market regulation, such as blue carbon. There are also still scientific uncertainties and need for more knowledge with more field data, participatory approach, interdisciplinary and multi-scale, but also transdisciplinary or intersectoral dialogue between stakeholders, between scientists, IPLC, manager, politicians. And finally, to explore innovative co-benefit actions for socio-ecosystem conservation. They are not on one single solution, but diverse, to be co-constructed with IPLC and be gender responsive. We have to explore nature-based solutions, but also community-based solutions, and explore some positive options, such as blue food, fair trade label, and etc. And I will give the floor to Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Christine, for this. So I will take the follow-up for the just a few words on the wildlife sustainable management and the five discussions, so the documents that are available or not, and the work to come. So for the wildlife sustainable management, globally, what is expected from this is that participants to the CBD process would call to extend existing guidance on the meat sector, as said previously, because there are this exact existing guidance on the meat sector, and the idea is to extend these good practices to other sectors and geographical areas, to other species and uses, because it's currently really limited to some elements of biodiversity in certain regions. So parties will be invited to work on a document produced by the Secretariat to complement such existing guidance. So the documents on the wildlife sustainable management are sorry if you can see this very well, but it's the SBSTTA-25 document with element for guidance for sustainable wildlife meat sector, the identification of complementary guidance and multidisciplinary approaches on this topic. So there is a document at the moment that I wrote the slide that was still to come, but I'm not sure that finally it corresponds to this. So we're surprised in what the Secretariat could send. But SBSTTA, we also have to consider the result of the IPBES assessment and the sustainable use of wild species, as Marie-Christine already presented before. And the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework contains 3 targets, as already presented: one on the conservation of wild and domesticated species, one on the trade of wild species, and the last one on the sustainability of the use of these wild species. And all these targets are linked with indicators. So I won't go back to the first part, as we already mentioned this. And on the right, you can see the highlighted indicators that are foreseen to monitor these 3 targets. So the target 4, which is on conservation, will be followed by the red list index, which is also an indicator for the goal A, the goal A level. Another one with on genetic diversity, which will talk about the proportion of population within species with an effective population size of above 500 individuals. The target 5 has an indicator, but only on fish stocks, so maybe it's a bit limited, but that's what has been agreed on COP15. And on target 9 on the sustainable use, there's one indicator on the benefits that we get from this sustainable use of wild species and the percentage of the population in traditional occupations that depends on these species. As you see, there is a mark at the end of these 2 indicators for target 9, and this appears in the decision document of the COP15. It means that these indicators are agreed on the principle, but there's no agreed methodology yet for these indicators. So there will be these headline indicators would be mandatory for the parties to report on the next stages of the COP15 process. And these headlines indicators could be associated to voluntary indicators at the national level, either component on complementary indicators. We will go back to this in the next session. But for sustainable wildlife management, this is it. So thank you for your attention, and feel free to ask questions. We have some time for this. Yes, we have a question from Audrey.
Yes, hello again, sorry. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think I put a comment in the chat regarding this. I think we really need to, well, we must, I'm going to stress the word, not make the confusion between important species for humans and the role of nature in sustaining the functioning of the world. And I think, well, I don't know, because the other topics that are proposed, I see this kind of protection nowhere, like the, you know, like the, it's not a question of invasive species, it's not a question of climate change. Just if there wasn't any climate change, we need to protect wildlife in general. And for me, it's more communities than just species, because most of the species that we consider as useful for humans, they are top predators. And if they have nothing to eat, they disappear. So talking about cockroaches or whatever, often it's one cryptic species or one very abundant species like plankton that will sustain the life, but it's not protected. And if it disappears, everything disappears. So we need to have a more global approach, an ecosystem approach. And there are many calls for this, at least in marine science. But I think we should stress that protecting wildlife or wild species that are of interest to human communities will not be enough. We need to have a global approach. And again, sorry about bringing that, but we need to connect the species within the ecosystem, but also the ecosystem among them to make sure that everything survives in the long term. And so the services, I don't know how to call them again. I have another word because I don't see the right word for this, but ecosystem.
The values. Animal. Okay, you give the example of marine fauna, but they have also intrinsic values.
But it's the same for the Amazonian forest.
For sure.
We need to protect.
That's a challenge. That's the issue, and probably the main challenge is to address at the same time the 3 pillars of the CBD, not only to protect emblematic species or the species that are on the keystone species that are the predators or the big 5, but also to address their sustainable use and the issue of equity. And that's the reason that the notion of ecosystem services is really a narrow perspective, a narrow view, and we have to take into all the world views and all the system of values associated with the species, with the populations, with the ecosystems, and that means not only the instrumental values, and that means the direct and indirect use, but also the relational values. And coming back to the example of shark, traditionally, sharks are not predators for the local people, but they are justicians. They are very different narratives, and it led me to answer another question, very important: the conflicts between human and wildlife. Coming back to France, there are really tensions and conflicts with the reintroduction of lynx, wolves, and bears, and in terms of domestic fauna, also conservation, in terms of livelihood, and in other contexts. For example, I am working on mangrove, but the tiger of Bengal, which is a protected species, they attack the people. So that's also an issue. That's the reason it is very a critical subject, because there are so many approaches. And I come back to the IPBES report, because and the next work program of IPBES, because they really address these different controversial approaches, we can say.
But I think that the thing I wanted to stress here is that we need to have a emblematic species approach for sure, because there are species that are important to humans, and they have a value for many reasons, because we eat them, because we love them, because we worship them, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But also there is a need to consider the functional ecology, so the functions of species with its nature, and maintain these functions and what they provide. So I call it services, but you can call it value if you want. I mean, I don't care, but we need to make sure that the recommendation will be to maintain the continuity in the communities, the wild communities, food webs, and between the network of ecosystems that need to be maintained to maintain life on Earth and the functioning of the planet.
Thank you. Maybe just 2 words on this. I know on the ecosystem services notion, as it is quite utilitarist, I know there is also this discussion between contribution to people that may enlarge or encompass more things than just the use, maybe, but I'm not a specialist in this. And for the species to conserve, yes, emblematic species can bring some attention and some reaching on the people to conserve, but I think functional aspects are quite important as an ecological way of thinking this. And maybe we can think about umbrella species, because we know when you're conserving umbrella species, you have a lot of habitats and other species that benefit from them, or engineer species that really shape the habitat and the ecosystem. So maybe that's some elements to think about.
But you can also have some species with rare functions that are totally ugly and and not protected at the moment. So, yeah.
Sure. And for example, for the soil microorganism,
yes.
things also. And I think we have also another question from sorry if I pronounce it badly, but Ekpa.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
so first
please.
of all, I want to thank the presenters. I want to thank the presenter. You see, speaking English as a second language can be very challenging, and I see that from France, you speak English very clearly. I could understand what you are saying. Right. So, what I want, I am an entomologist, and I see that insects are not given priority when conservation decisions are taken globally. I want to know what determines what is that criteria that is being used to assess the value of a species for conservation purpose? What determines the selection of particular wildlife species and say, okay, this is the one that we are to focus on? Because I understand that globally there are certain priorities that are given to particular species. So how are you going to do what are you going to do to accommodate all species and give all species equal attention in terms of trying to protect and conserve them?
A few years ago, there is a very interesting analysis of the criteria used by my colleagues of the National Museum of Natural History to do recommendations to IUCN and for the red release. And what is really interesting in this study is that among the scientists and among experts in fauna and flora, they are not agree. What does it mean? An heritage species, as I said, there are diverse criteria in terms of umbrella species, in terms of the importance of this species in the functions and in terms of functions, but also rare, endangered, etc., etc. And it is really a subject of negotiation. And the list of IUCN, for example, the red list is more and more long, trying to take into account yes, it is an issue of negotiation between the different states, but on the recommendation of scientists. And what we can regret is that very often these criteria doesn't take into account the criteria of the people, and nature for some are not the nature, is not the nature of the other, and it is very often unfair. But I would like to say it is inefficient if we are not able to include the people who are living on the ground, who are next to the emblematic species or emblematic species. Very often it doesn't work, because there are resistance, or because there are what we call the illegal practices, so for me it's really a key issue of the issue of on inclusivity, and to include the people on the ground in the decision making. If not, it cannot work. Or we see in some countries that the army are in charge to impose the rules. It's very violent. So it's a critical issue.
Oh, okay, thank you, Marie-Christine. I think this will respond to the question. We have another question on the chat. Maybe it's more than a comment. Ricardo was saying that the IUCN criteria are adapted mainly for vertebrates, but it's changing to apply them to invertebrates. So in general, the conservation strategies much based through vertebrates and insects are largely overlooked, yet representing more than 20% of animal species. So that's much of a comment than a question, but I think we already a little, but you can go forward. And the other one is another comment from Robert, who's saying we in Europe have special problem. The wildlife management means 3 activities depending on the population status: protection, sustainable use, and control. We should adapt our management goals and regulation to the health situation. The coexistence of different species, for example, large herbivores and carnivores with humans, and the survival of small gene species on intensive farmlands are rather serious problems. The economic importance of hunting differs between western and eastern part of Europe. Gene species are important actors in terrestrial ecosystems, so the sustainable wildlife management is colorful and complex subject. Should we speak about these issues?
I couldn't agree more. Yes.
Comment from Audrey saying one of the key things not to forget here is, I think, to include measures aiming to protect biodiversity in general as an instrument against environmental changes, because all species and most ecosystems are linked. And this even if the exact role of the value of the ecosystem and each of their species is not known yet.
Mm-hmm. And that's the reason also we have not to forget the links between domestic and wild fauna, for instance, with huge consequences. And that's the reason also that the One Health approach is a virtuous approach, but very difficult to apply on the field.
I think we have another question from Agnes. I don't know if previous colleague that asked the question is
yes.
Yeah, okay, go on.
Yeah. Yes, I just wanted to ask, because much of this what has been discussed is related to me to society and also to ecosystem services, nature's contribution to people. Like we try to ensure that the whole ecosystems are functioning, whether it's for their own sake or whether it's specifically also to sustain maybe also more vulnerable peoples than most of us in Western world. And I can see that it's in the GBF incorporated in Goal B and also in Target 11, but I'm not sure how far. I mean, in your call for experts, the by ecosystem services has been one line. I would be curious how far it is actually focused of the project, and also on how much there are different attempts towards that, incorporating ecosystem services into CBD implementation within Europe. Maybe a bit broad, but thanks for any information.
Do you have some question?
No comment.
Sorry, I think I don't have also to respond to this, but I think that's an important issue, and we keep this comment for the rest of the reflection on the topic. And yes, I think maybe that's something we maybe didn't make too much focus on, but actually biodiversity have to be conserved for itself per se. So there is also this dimension. Everything is not, even if we are thinking about the use, we don't even know what the uses will be in the future. So just as an insurance strategy, we should conserve as much as possible, because we don't even know what we will need in the future. Maybe that's another aspect from this question.
And we have not to forget that there are direct uses and also indirect uses, and the impacts and the consequences are not the same. And there is also a key issue in terms of animal welfare. It's another issue.
Okay, so if there's no other question, I think we can stop here on this topic. Thank you very much, Marie-Christine. And now I think we can go to the next session, which will be on the monitoring framework for the coming Montreal Global Bio Framework. So I will share my screen. See my screen. And I will just make the beginning of this presentation, as the rest of this presentation will be done by Aurelio and Giacomo. So thank you to them, and I will pass the speak to them just after my part. So this is the topic and the monitoring framework for the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework.
Sorry, Robin, we still don't
Yep.
see the presentation.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I don't currently see it.
Do you see it?
We do.
Okay.
No, I
thank
see
you.
it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. The structure of this presentation. So first part I will talk about is the history in the CBD discussion of this topic, and then my two colleagues will present the next two parts, which is on the current context of biodiversity indicators, post COP15 discussion, and finally the main issues on biodiversity indicators for this monitoring framework. So I will present some historical aspect on the CBD discussion on indicators. So previous global strategy from CBD for biodiversity was from 2010 to 2020. They were called the ICU targets. And what we can say about them, but we already have some. There were only a few quantitative aspects and on the target. So always knew what quantity of efforts we have to do for reaching these targets. There are no great indicators in 2010 after the COP10, and there were just parties that has been called to implement nationally, but so mandatory aspect, and particularly no monitoring tool available at the moment of the decision. So actually the indicators 6 years after, so just 4 years before the end of the strategy, though. So I think that's a problem. And the IPBES made a report on the progress in 2019, and as you see on the right side of the slide, is where the 20 targets of the IC targets, and you see in the column on the right the results of these targets with red with poor progress, yellow with good progress. But actually there has been a publication in 2014 that already foreseen this failure of the IC targets with a midterm analysis that showed that we were not on the path to recovery. So what we can have some as a lesson from this is that the delay in monitoring is a delay on action. So there is a risk with this. We also see that the lack of global agreed systems do not allow for a global picture. So there are only national reports that can give, maybe if they do so, a national picture for biodiversity, but it's difficult to aggregate information from national level to global level. And also we need for comprehensive and consistent dashboard to assess the progress for such strategies. So what we learned also from the GBO, the Global Biodiversity Outlook number 5, which was published in 2020, and which was based on national reports, is that we need more effort on direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss action. We also need to integrate more, be more inclusive with the people, for example, on the gender, IPLCs, and the stakeholder engagement level. We also need to strengthen national strategy, well, the implementation. Regarding the targets and the monitoring framework that come with it, we have to need some smart targets, which means specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound, and relevant assessment of the progress. We need also to shorten inertia in planning and implementing strategies and action plans, because sometimes action is delayed in time and maybe not the time for such an inertia. We also need to scale up the ambition of national commitments through these global strategies. We also need for comprehensive adaptive management, in particular by facilitating scientific and technical cooperation. And we need for greater attention to implementation, as already said before, and support to countries. So on the graphic is another representation of the progress on the 20 IG targets with a more graduation scale of assessment. So at COP15, just to sum up very shortly, there has been quite a north and south opposition on during the discussion that we can associate with the ambition and needs discussion, because to be a little caricatural, actually the country from the north or the rich countries want to have a very ambitious strategy, but the South countries are saying, okay, you want to be ambitious, but biodiversity is also in our countries. We also need this for our development. So how we could discuss about the ambition and the needs, where biodiversity is used, where the biodiversity is conserved, and how we can adjust the ambition and the resource mobilization for this conservation. And this was a strong discussion during COP15. So as an output, we've been through a great package of decision for balanced compromise at the end of COP15, with 6 documents being adopted as a whole. So this is the global biodiversity framework with these 4 goals and 23 targets, which shows the ambition. The monitoring framework, so the indicator that goes with the goals and the targets to assess the progress. The mechanism for planning, reporting, monitoring, and to be sure that we get some feedback from the countries on their progress in implementation on this strategy. So the document on resource mobilization to finance and to help the implementation of this strategy. Some aspect on capacity building and scientific and technical cooperation, and the last point on digital sequence information and genetic resources, which is at the same time a technical discussion, but also a very political discussion regarding the access and benefit sharing and the resource mobilization aspect. So this all 6 document has been adopted as a whole to have a balance and between all the demands and what the parties was hoping from this global strategy. So this is just the historical aspect that has been discussed in the COP15 and CBD arena. And now I'll lead to my colleague Arindo for the next part of the presentation. So I will go.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Robin. So just to talk a little bit about this second part, which is more related to let's say this current discussion after the coming Montreal Agreement. I think it's interesting. We have this first this general idea about how is structured this when we talk about these specific indicators for the monitoring framework. So we have basically this called the headline indicators that were more or less important indicators that the parties should try to follow in order we have a sort of a more standardized information that we can track the progress of the framework. But somehow connected to them, we have this called of global indicators. Within their nature, they are binary, And they are especially important in terms of to give insights in terms of how policy, legislation, financial aspects are progressing within the countries when they are implementing the framework. But there is an important thing here that these indicators, which is clearly stated in the documents, that they shouldn't actually replace the headline indicators. They should actually work together, but not replace, because the headline indicators, they are more important towards to understand how the species and the ecosystems are progressing. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And then by the end, we have this called component indicators and also these complementary indicators, there are a lot of indicators actually that make part of these two groups, but they are more with the parts. They should consider more this in terms of if they want to produce a more in-depth analysis or something like that, but they are not necessarily the main ones that they should be considered. And of course, these indicators, something that was highlighted as very important is that they should have this kind of property that we can look at these indicators through these different scales from regional, national, global. So they should have this characteristic to be disaggregated or aggregated. So these are also important aspects that are related to more specifically to these indicators that we should consider for the monitoring framework. The next, please. Thank you. And I think within this context, maybe the most important thing for us to highlight here as the main issue under discussion is that we have some indicators that they didn't have yet a sort of agreed up-to-date methodology. So if we consider only the headline indicators, as I mentioned in the previous slides, that their importance, we have around 26 headline indicators that were agreed for the monitoring framework. And from these headline indicators, 10, they don't have yet an agreed methodology. So it means that this will for sure require a lot of efforts from now on to really develop and think carefully to design methodologies that can be support to complement these gaps. And so therefore most of the efforts we would have to think is towards to continue to identify and develop ways that we can fill these gaps and design methodologies and publish these methodologies to be able to use these other indicators that currently don't have this methodology agreed yet. The next one. Thank you. And so just to close this part, I mean, these indicators, I think it's very important we consider that these indicators, they should meet now, or at least be able to meet this until 2025. The following criteria, if we think in terms of more technical aspects that these indicators should inform in terms of the kind of the quality of the information. First, they should have the data and the metadata for these indicators. They should be publicly available. This is very important to provide the means for the different parts to be able to use. Also, this methodology should be published in peer-reviewed academic journals or somehow went to this kind of scientific peer-reviewed process. This also is something very important. This data source, they should be compiled and regularly updated. In the document, they said this update should be less than 5 years, if possible. So this is very important because we want to constantly to have reviews and monitor how this progress is going. So we need this kind of temporal aspect as well. And and the mechanism for maintaining this indicator methodology, they should be somehow to work together with these partnerships, for example, like the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership or other intergovernmental organizations. This is important because somehow it's related to this kind of infrastructure or capacity building that we have much more developed in some countries or parties than in others. So it's important to consider this because these indicators and this data, they need to be available and stored for long term. And also very important to somehow provide this guidance in terms of the use of these indicators. So this kind of engagement with the policymakers, it's also very important to make this more understandable, more clearly. We see that even us, when we are reading these papers, these documents, actually, we see that there are a lot of information that sometimes is difficult to understand. So we need to make clear that during this engagement with the policymakers, this is very well and clearly worked, I think. And also these indicators, they should be able to detect these trends. So this is very important because this is one of the main criteria that was discussed when we consider the previous RG target. So it means that we need to be able with these indicators to see how the state of the nature, ecosystem, species, they are changing, progressing. So this is also very important. And another point is that as much as possible, these indicators, they should build up on what is already in place when we consider, so therefore consider synergies with other frameworks, like for example, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and also these other frameworks for accounting, for national accounting, and the essential biodiversity variables, to just name a few of them. But this is also something very important. And I think now it's Giacomo that will continue the presentation.